The most dangerous group of any society is overeducated, underpaid people. They are the most dangerous.
Dig into that for a minute. What do you mean by that?
Okay, like even in the Tsarist Russia, we had this, which was, you have people who went to school, got a discipline of some sort, and expected, had been told by their parents and by their teachers and by their guidance counselor, you get that master's in,
classics.
Well, classics would be useful, but in marketing or gender or it could be a lot of different things, and you're entitled to a job which will allow you to afford to live in New York City or San Francisco. It didn't work. So what you get is this resentment. So you've had, if you look at rebellions throughout history, it's largely this class that sparks them. It's generally not the peasantry and even the working class by itself that's doing it. You look at the people around Lenin. Most of those people were well educated. Lenin was from quasi, like sort of the bottom part of the aristocracy. So and high up in the Russian administration. The French Revolution filled with underemployed lawyers. So this is a class. They're articulate, they're capable of organization, and they're resentful. They feel, and in some cases, the resentment is okay, but they feel that the society doesn't recognize their value, and that's Mamdani's base. People who've gone through the woke colleges, have all the luxury beliefs, very often are from upper middle class families, make not enough money to live decently in New York. And so these kids are going to have to make a choice. Do I want to have, make a living, buy a house, have a family, progress as an adult, or do I stay in New York City and San Francisco as essentially the ward of the state?
All right. The thing that I'm immediately thinking about is there's an article by Friedrich Hayek called The Intellectuals in Socialism.
Right.
And he points, he's asking the question, like, why is this intellectual class so inclined towards essentially a totalitarian social planner
and by the
ideology?
Way, also in Germany, which I can get into that quite a bit of detail.
But in some cases, in my reading of Hayek, who's probably the thinker I've read the most consistently, some of his framing around Germany was also to try to get at these ideas in an acceptable way.
Right.
Like even like The Road to Serfdom's focused on the Nazis, but it's really about the Soviets. He makes a very similar argument. He's like, you have an intellectual class that believes they're entitled to be treated like royalty, even though they don't produce very much value for others, which is why they don't make much money.
Right.
Like, say, all of academia, no offense.
No, I'm not an academic.
And
at least by training.
And so you're a professor, you resent all these like brutish businessmen that make more money than you, and you get wrapped up in utopian ideas, and next thing you know, you're advocating for the destruction of the society like every time. And I didn't really realize how much that pattern sort of tracks back through history.
And it has also implications like Frederick Spotts did a very good book called Hitler and the Power of the Aesthetic. And what Spotts did is he showed how strong Hitler's support was at the university level, in the architecture community, in the arts community, in the film community. One big advantage, get rid of all the gays and Jews. That's going to open up a lot of positions. You think about it today. If you're an academic and, no Zionists need apply, well, you know what? I don't think it's bragging to say a lot of people as Zionists are really smart and have a lot of talent. But you get rid of them. A lot of gay people have a lot of talent and are very creative. If you got rid of them.
They're great at gentrifying cities, let me tell you.
Yes, for sure. So I think that there's I think that Hayek was onto something, and I think it shows in almost all the sociology of the Soviet Union and today in China, where it's become, again, very hierarchical, very sort of like the old Confucian system with a big exam.
Well, and even Mao's Guard, right? I mean, Mao's Guard were young people, and I don't know this for a fact, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were the young sort of college-educated crowd.
They were, well,
But maybe that's a little more complex there.
That's probably more modern. Modern. At that point, there were not as many people in college, but you had a generation that was coming up, a very big generation, because it was before their baby bust. Big generation coming up. I've interviewed former Red Guards, so I've sort of seen it firsthand. You know, there was this generation come up. They were very numerous, and there was a group of people who had been in positions of influence at least since the revolution. So the idea was get rid of those people. This is exactly what happened with Stalin in the Great Purges. There was all these young people who had been brought up under the Soviet system, but there were all these old Bolsheviks who were in control of everything. And Stalin said, "We'll get rid of them, and then you'll get a good job." Now, I do think that we're sort of moving into an era where there are sort of two different Americas of sort, and it's not ideology that's the main factor. There's a part of America where people say, "I have to live in one of these few cities. I want to be in a place where all the sort of woke ideas are still fairly strong." I don't.
Why would you want that?
I don't. Well, because if I'm, this is particularly true, unfortunately, with women. They want to live in this environment, without, essentially, with very little male interference. Let's put it that way.
Or very, very little testosterone. Let's say
that's for sure. And you're in a culture that's built around not about families and probably not about married people. I mean, married some, but a lot of people who either live together or single. I mean, the majority of households in Manhattan are single.
There's a graph in an NBC poll that was done recently that broke things down by male and female Harris voters versus male and female Trump voters, left to right. And in the top, and it was very personal choices. You're ranked 1 to 13, listed priorities. The number one priority for male Trump voters was having kids. Now, actually, female Trump voters, that was like number 6.
Right.
Harris voters, it was second to bottom.
Right.
Female.
Well, look, you think about it. You have a woman who, product of academia, definitely a DEI hire, and no.
Are you talking about Harris?
Yeah, and no kids. I mean, so and I think that so that's one America, and it's not insignificant. And then there's the other America where people are moving to places where they can have children, where going to church or synagogue doesn't make you a weirdo, where where kids get a good education, where you could where it's usually somewhat affordable, and these are two Americas. And so I think what we're going to see in the next few decades, the power of the first America is actually going to be sustained by a very low birth rate, and by this group of women, and obviously somewhat consequently men who never have children, never get married.
It'll be sustained by that, or it'll die as a result?
It'll be sustained for a while until the areas where people have children overcome them. So, like, for instance, if you look at the states where the people have the most kids, they're mostly in the South, in the Great Plains. That's where people have children, and that's where people get married. I mean, if you go, in the old days when I was growing up, middle-class people lived in New York. Middle-class families lived in Manhattan. My dentist lived in Manhattan.
Yeah.
Friends of mine lived in Manhattan. And you certainly could be a upper middle class with a couple of kids. You could do that.
Yeah.
I think that's becoming harder and harder and harder to do and live in Manhattan. The demographics are pretty clear there. So I think, in many ways, New York and to some extent some of the other big cities serve a function as almost like graduate schools for certain careers where it's really good to be there. But long term, I don't think that works. And I think it's a shame. And I think it's unfortunately sparked a cultural divide in the country where people who are married, have kids, maybe own a house, don't live in Manhattan, have a very different worldview than the people who live in Manhattan. The problem is the New York Times, even the Wall Street Journal,
outside of the opinion section, for sure.
Opinion, they're the same people. They're the same attitudes. They went to the same colleges. They have the same beliefs. They don't even understand the rest of the country. What's going to be really interesting to see is when does the woke people run into the real class warriors, and how does that break down? And that's going to be fascinating to watch, because if you're Mamdani, what your working class constituency that you think you have is very different than what your wokeists want. What are you going to do when they close down the charter schools? Who do you think goes to the charter schools in New York? They're African-American and Latino kids. It's really going to be interesting to see how he deals with those issues. You close down that, or, and what I don't understand, like the community grocery stores, his base among South Asians is filled with people with little grocery stores. And the problem that Mamdani is going to have is, it's one thing to be a lunatic in Madison or Austin or Ann Arbor. You can kind of get away with it because there's a lot of homogeneity, and there's a certain tolerance, and people have to be in these places because they're state capitals, and they have the major university. But that doesn't work in a big city like New York, filled with new and recent immigrants, with a well-developed multi-generational underclass. You're really going to try that there?
If you like this clip, we've got so much more where that came from. So be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss our new videos as they come out each week.